Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update for the 16th of March 2023. Let's go to our usual opening gambit. The Ukraine released figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats, inaccuracy, propaganda. I find these indicatively useful. That gives you a good sense of the trends. And also, I think they're pretty accurate, especially more recently. So a really bad day for the Russian losses in terms of personnel. 1,040 is near record losses. It's a huge number to lose a day. 12 tanks, 11 APCs, and 11 artillery systems, 1 MLRS as well. Again, pretty significant numbers there. It seems like things are tough on the front lines, and one must assume the usual places: Bakhmut, Vuhledar, Avdivka. Tanks also being lost in other places. I'm going to show you a T90 lost in Kreminna. So there are other places where equipment is being lost. 3 anti-aircraft warfare systems, and again, I keep mentioning that daily chipping away at the air defenses of the Russians is really important. If that is 3, books, S300s, even I'm not sure what they are, but that would be a huge loss, or it might just be autocannons. Not sure, but nevertheless useful for the Ukrainians. 1 aircraft that was lost around Bakhmut, if it is the one I indeed think it is. 13 drones and 17 vehicles and fuel tanks. That represents quite a challenging day for the Russians. Of course, Ukrainians are going to be losing a lot, particularly in Bakhmut as well, and equipment too. There will be difficult for them, but this is a huge number of certainly people and a significant number of pieces of equipment. So, yeah, challenging for the Russians. This is a Su-24. This is taken out near Bakhmut. Now, actually, this footage is interesting because there was a like a TV crew, I think, filming the unit that did this, and there's the ejected pilot. I don't know if there were 2 people in this. So basically, they're interviewing, doing a segment or something on these people in the building who are firing these Igla manpads. And the work they do, and they actually shot one down. So there's footage of them before and after, and congratulating themselves and talking about the hit. They're talking about one person might have died, and that there was a gunner and a pilot. One survived, and it's really interesting to see the insights. And I'll probably show you that in the extra video later. I have so much stuff to share with you. But anyway, that's a Su-24 taken out. Here's a T90. Russians tried to break through in the Kremlin front, and at least one of their most modern T90 had ended in disaster. The T90M was damaged and, more interestingly, captured by Ukrainian forces. Not for the first time. Actually, they've captured a number of these now. And Serhiy Haidai said yesterday, so he's the Luhansk administration chappie, he claimed that they've run through their T90s now. They brought them to the Kremlin area, and now they're going back to the T72s. This, if that is true, indicates a real loss for the Russians, and here is a bit of evidence to support that claim. So UK estimates 20 to 30,000 Russian forces have been killed, wounded in Bakhmut since May. So there's been, May is 5th month, so that's about 9 months of fighting in Bakhmut. 20 to 30,000 Russians taken out. UK official said during his speech in Vienna on March 15th that Russian military leaders have sacrificed military units and squandered strategic resources for small tactical gains. Russia is suffering extremely heavy casualty rates, the UK military advisor Ian Stubbs said. There's so many numbers flying around about who's losing what on the front lines. So I just always defer back to Russia are losing loads of troops. I mean, I don't know what number is accurate. I'm just fairly sure they're losing loads, and I'm fairly sure they're losing more than the Ukrainians, as according to pretty much all the stats apart from the Russian MOD. Again, it's like, why do I think that's the case? What evidence do I have to support that? And my attempts here every day is to support those claims with evidence. So here's another piece of the jigsaw, and this is, like, I think the third in the last week of Russian cemeteries, Wagner cemeteries particularly, that have been found in different areas of Russian controlled territory, or even Russia itself. So another day, another Wagner cemetery, this one in Kursk. So this is in Russia, although some discrimination at work here as all the Wagner graves are kept separate from the others at the city's southern graveyard. Uh, yes, so there are significant graveyards for Wagner. There was a piece done by, I think it was Sky News, that was walking around graveyards and saying, they're running out of space, etc., words to that effect. So, yet piecing together the jigsaw, are these claims about losses for Russians around Bakhmut, are they reliable? Well, there's quite a lot of graves, so something's going on. And going down to Vuhledar, the British intelligence update today has actually sometimes I think they're a bit like, have you just been like me, just looking at Twitter and stuff, and I can do that, and sometimes I think, oh, I've made some of the claims before the UK intelligence update, and they're lagging behind even me. What's going on there, and then sometimes they're quite useful. You take your pick. Over the last week, Russian attempts to assault the Donetsk oblast town of Vuhledar have almost certainly slowed. This follows repeated, extremely costly failed attacks over the previous 3 months. One factor in Russia's heavy losses, and this is the interesting bit, is in this sector has been Ukraine's successful adoption of remote anti-armor mine systems, RAM. RAM is a specialist artillery shell which scatters anti-armor mines up to 17 kilometers away from the firing unit. Nothing I haven't told you. I've told you that in Vuhledar area they have both people going out and laying mines, but also relying quite a lot on firing mines from artillery pieces. There are also ones you can fire from HIMARS style rockets or multiple launch rocket systems, but these artillery shells will fire and then split apart and lay like a bunch of mines. And that's what they're doing. But the interesting part, and I've told you that before, the interesting part is in some instances, Ukraine has launched mines over and behind advancing Russian units, causing disarray when the Russian vehicles attempt to withdraw. So either they get hit or they're dropping off troops and then go back. And it's at that time when they're retreating, thinking, well, we've just driven through here, so we know this is safe. And then they hit a bunch of mines. I think that's a pretty clever use of mines as far as I'm concerned from the Ukrainians. Russia's only notable recent tactical success has been in the Bakhmut sector, which is dominated by Wagner Group mercenary forces currently engaged in public feud with the Russian Ministry of Defense. There is a realistic possibility that Russia's MOD has been insistent in its drive for success in Vuhledar, partially because it wants its own success to compete with Wagner's achievements. Interesting. Then Dmitry from War Translated has translated a Telegram channel, a Ukrainian channel. This is a Ukrainian channel, Bakhmut Demon, with close links to defenders of Bakhmut, gives an update. Believes encirclement of the city is unlikely. Even Russians don't believe it. Interesting. So, and Tendal says this corroborates with what's been happening in the last days. The closer we get to the Ukrainian counteroffensive, the less time Russians have to take Bakhmut. Russians might feel compelled to launch a final frontal assault with all remaining reserves. I think there's a case for saying that Russians are throwing everything in the kitchen sink at Bakhmut. They need this, and they're rushing it through. Ukrainians are still maintaining that defending it is the right idea. There's lots of counterclaims and lots of discussion about this. It is every day is tighter and tighter and tougher in Bakhmut. Bakhmut is getting like encircled and closed off. More that cauldron is being throttled slowly. But then you hear claims like this saying that even the Russians don't think they'll take Bakhmut. There's been a bunch of videos coming out from Bakhmut, TikTok, and so on of supposedly of Ukrainians complaining that things are really bad there, and then some counterclaims have been like, well, actually, they wouldn't be using their phones. Some of these are quite long videos, and they just wouldn't be using mobile phones that are traceable for that long amount of time in those areas. And so there's some counterclaims to say some of these might be psyops, but I don't know. I imagine it is probably bad in Bakhmut. Soldiers complain. Someone on the thread said this yesterday. Soldiers complain all the time, right? So you are going to get, it's not like your life is going to be awesome when you're fighting any war, no matter what side you're on and how well you're doing. Like conditions are going to be horrible. Life is going to be tough. People are dying. So you will get complaints. The question is it so bad for the Ukrainians that they really shouldn't be there, that this is a bad decision made by the leaders? Or surely the leaders, if they are both military leaders and Zelensky, it's not just a political decision. There is some military utility for them continuing to hold Bakhmut, even given consistent days of losing territory there. Okay, going back to the drone, there's still lots of discussion about the drone. Putin approved Russia's downing of the US drone, according to NBC. Uh, Tim White's pretty critical here. USA spent the day trying to downplay the incident to avoid escalating tensions, which I'm 100% sure Putin predicted, hence why he did this. Show weakness, get hit. I'm not sure. Like, part of me thinks that Putin wouldn't know what an airplane is doing, like circling a Reaper drone. He's got other things to think about. Like, that is about delegating that to your army. That don't bother me with that. I don't, so I don't know that Putin would be involved in that. And there are some people, like I was listening to the Ukraine latest podcast. The Dom Nichols was talking, so a military guy talking on a Telegraph podcast, talking about actually the American response is about what you'd expect, and is a good response, which is not to escalate to a point where you're going to get World War III. So it depends how you view this. Some people want the US to respond really strongly, and other people are saying, well, if you respond strongly, then like this is game over. And then some people are saying, well, there is a meaningful difference between a drone and a manned plane. So if that was a jet that was down, then obviously there'll be a reaction. And some people are saying, well, actually, that's a bit. Yes, it's a human being, but it's a bit of a false distinction to say that you can down this thing, but you can't down that thing. So there are just lots of discussions around this, and whether the US are reacting correctly or not. I guess if you want to criticize the US, you will say they aren't, and if you want to defend them, you say they're doing the right thing. I'm a bit ambivalent. I'm like, I can see value in both kind of ways of reacting. My thought would be react with weapons. React with, yeah, okay, you want to do that? We're going to send up more planes down the Black Sea, so that ain't happening again. Our Reapers are going to be surrounded by a couple of Eurofighters or whatever, and then we're also going to give some ATACMS. That's how we're going to react. So I think it's too early to see what's going on there, but that would be how I would deal with that. CNN says that the Russians have reached the drone crash site in the Black Sea, according to two US officials. Russian senior defense officials ordered Russian fighter jets to harass a US drone over the Black Sea, according to officials familiar. Okay, moving on from the drone, we'll go back to Dmitry War translated. This is Prigozhin directly accused. So he's a guy in charge of Wagner. Directly accuses the Russian MOD of purposely cutting ammo supplies in order to prevent Wagner from taking Bakhmut under any circumstances, because Soledar was enough. You succeeded in Soledar, well done. We don't want you to have too much success, so we're not going to give you artillery ammunition. He revealed it in a heated interview published today. I mean, there is this big spat between the MOD and Prigozhin, and I don't think it's being solved anytime soon. It'd be fascinating to see what happens to Prigozhin, what happens to Wagner going forward after some resolution to Bakhmut. Belgorod is under attack again. And I've been wondering about this. So Belgorod has been consistently hit with Ukrainian missiles every night for the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 nights maybe. Is this a good use of missiles? Are they, well, first of all, are they hitting? I don't know. The claims from the Belgorod officials are that they are shooting down these missiles with air defense missiles. And you would have thought there would be, if they had hit significant targets, there would be footage leaking out from Belgorod. So it might well be that the missiles are being hit. Is this a good use of Ukrainian missiles? Is Belgorod the right target? I don't know. Somebody knows. So who am I to know? I assume it is. I'm assuming there must be some value in using up missiles in Belgorod on Belgorod. And is it a case like the Russians do with the Ukraine of using up air defense missiles to then eventually be able to get through? I don't know. In Kerch, a fire was recorded near the former iron ore plant. So there is something happening in Crimea. Don't know whether that is partisan activity or something else. Who knows? But good news for the Ukrainians, most probably. And interesting, a huge fire in occupied Berdyansk. So Berdyansk is on the Azov Sea between Mariupol and Crimea, effectively. It's a port. This is a guest house called Svetlana, with the owner a well-known businesswoman in the city. There are allegations she continued to operate throughout the war, and Russia's invaders frequented the place. I don't know if that's sort of cryptic, but anyway, that is burning down. Is that partisan activity taking out collaborators the place of work, I don't know. And Russia on fire. Do you believe in coincidences? What are the chances of two sawmills catching fire within hours in the same region of Russia? The blazes happened in Ilkino in Vladimir Oblast. Then the same thing happened 30 miles away in the Murom district. So fire. Fire seems to be a real uh, thing in Russia every single day. Um, Going to the Black Sea, atypical activity of the Russians was noticed in the Black Sea. They took out 20 ships and a lot of units of the auxiliary fleet, according to the Operational Command South. Among the ships are also 4 Caliber cruise missile carriers with a possible volley of 28 missiles. So this is one of two things. Either it looks like they're getting ready for another missile volley, or they are out looking for bits of drone. So that could well be that that activity represents looking for a drone in the sea. This worries me. I've talked to you about before about how I hate indoctrination of children. Really freaks me out. The Verkhovna Rada Commissioner for Human Rights, Dmitry Lubinets, published a video in which he showed military training courses for school children and kindergarten students arranged by the Russians in Sevastopol. So that's in Crimea, temporarily occupied Crimea. I don't like this. I don't like this at all. What a sad reflection. Yeah. So good to be a child there, right? Okay, let's go on to military aid and assistance to Ukraine. First port of call is this Politico article. Ukraine doesn't have any time to waste. US races to prepare Kyiv for spring offensive. So the US military is rushing equipment to the battlefield and training Ukrainian forces at a rapid pace ahead of a major offensive against Russia expected by late spring. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin projected a sense of urgency on Wednesday after a virtual meeting in the multinational Ukraine Defense Contact Group. So Ramstein basically met by Teams, by Microsoft Teams or whatever, yesterday, and quite a bit of military aid has come out of this. But Lloyd Austin saying Ukraine doesn't have any time to waste. We have to deliver swiftly and fully on our promised commitments, Austin said. That includes delivering armored capabilities to the battlefield and ensuring the Ukrainian soldiers get the training, spare parts, and maintenance support that they need to use these new systems as soon as possible. As spring approaches, US officials are increasingly concerned about Ukraine's dwindling supply of ammunition, air defenses, and experienced soldiers. I'm going to talk about all that in a second. Moscow and Kyiv are continuing to throw bodies into a fight for the southeastern city that US does not consider strategically important. I'm starting to think it is somewhat tactically important around there. I think it would just open up the areas behind there. And so I think that is playing a part. But the Pentagon says that regardless of Kyiv's battlefield strategy, the US wants Ukraine's soldiers to have the weapons they need to keep fighting. Russia has spent months pummeling the country with missiles, seeking not only to cause destruction but also deplete Ukraine's air defense stocks. Ukrainian soldiers have described acute shortage of basic ammunition, including mortar rounds and artillery shells. Now, this next claim has caused a bit of controversy. Some people say the author doesn't know the difference between casualties and killed in action, and has taken the casualty number and applied it and interpreted that as killed in action. Whereas, see, casualties, when you're talking in like normal life, if you're talking about casualties in, I don't know, a fire in a warehouse, often is interpreted as deaths. But whereas casualties in war definitely means wounded and deaths, and in fact, can sometimes mean wounded, deaths, deserters, and prisoners. So they are very different things. But if you aren't used to knowing the term in that way very explicitly, then you can interpret that as just deaths. And some claim that the author of this article has done this by saying, and upwards of 100,000 Ukrainian forces have died in the year-long war, US officials estimate, including the most experienced soldiers. Now, that may be true. It may be the number, but it's not the official line, certainly from the Ukrainians. So there has been some pushback on that claim. Um, More than 600 Ukrainians in February completed a 5-week training program in Germany that included basic skills such as marksmanship, along with medical training and instruction on combined arms maneuver with US-made Bradley fighting vehicles and Stryker armored personnel carriers. Those forces are now back on the battlefield, with a second batch of hundreds of additional soldiers now going through the program. Behind closed doors, US officials have been pressing Kyiv to conserve artillery shells and fire in a more targeted fashion. This is a particular concern in Bakhmut, where both sides are expending munitions at a rapid pace. Some in the Pentagon think that they are burning up ammunition too fast, said retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges. Ben Hodges is a great person to follow, former commander of US Army forces in Europe. Excuse me, they're in a massive fight for the survival of their country against an enemy that has huge advantages in artillery ammunition, and is not letting up. In other words, of course they're using loads of ammunition. They're fighting for their lives. It's what's going to happen. Anyway, let's put that to. So the point of saying this is that the US are really, and I presume all the allies, really cognizant of the time demands on giving Ukraine all of what they need, like the weapons, the mechanized equipment, the ammunition, and the weapons, the training and the maintenance and supply and logistics, training and provision. And all of that needs to happen super bloody quick, because you've got a counteroffensive. They're all building to this counteroffensive, or counteroffensives that will be taking place late spring, possibly summer. And as a result, so let's piece together what's going on in light of that. The European Union can allocate 500 million euros for the production of 155mm caliber ammunition for their subsequent transfer to Ukraine. Now, all options are being considered, including the use of the EU budget if necessary. Slovakia plans to double the production of ammunition, the Minister of Defense of the country, Yaroslav Nagy, said. According to him, the production of ammunition has already doubled, and now they want to increase it by a further 100%, so doubling it again. And going to the US, this is an excellent example of win-win. US American blue-collar workers are getting paid, and Ukrainians are getting armed to defend themselves. Freedom hand in hand. So Pennsylvania workers are working 24/7 to produce ammunition for Ukraine. They are silent heroes, and there is a lot to be said for this. It sort of talks about the defense, military industrial complex, and defense spending. When people who are anti-giving Ukraine like blank checks, or the US, for example, I'm using US as an example, could be any country, giving Ukraine X, Y, and Z. It's like, what are we doing spending all this money? But quite often that it's not that money. It's the price tags they fix, the things that have already been built and are sitting in warehouses, not getting used. We're going to give them, it's worth this much money, but we're not paying that much money. We're not taking that money out of the bank and throwing it at Ukraine. Or if we are taking money out and spending it, we're spending it indigenously. We're spending it internally. We're spending it in Pennsylvania. Right, build all these. You guys, here's a bunch of money, go and do that. So that money goes into these pockets and that company's pockets, and you get some tax revenue back, and you stimulate the economy, and these guys go and spend. So $10 given to a guy here, or $100 given to a guy here, is spent locally, and that $100 generates more than $100. So you've got to understand spending money. This is a classic. This is what happened in the after the crash, right? In 2008. We had a Conservative government in the UK. So the Tory government said, we're not going to spend money, and we're going to cut our costs. It's like having a credit card. The economy is like a credit card, and we're spending too much, so we're going to cut. And this was austerity. But the other side of the coin is, if you want to have economic growth, you need to stimulate the economy. So you can't cut. If you cut, there's nothing, no one's got any money, no one's going to be spending money, and you are just going to spiral downwards. So the other side of the coin, Labour, for example, was saying, and actually it turns out that I think the latest analyses are that austerity didn't work. And in fact, if we had done what kind of Labour was saying, we would have had a more stimulated economy, which is, yeah, we might need to borrow money as a government, but if we're spending it, think about the New Deal in America after the Second World War. You spend money, like, right, go and build roads, go and do this, go and do that. Okay, now everyone's got money and they're going to be spending that. You've got 1,000 quid in your pocket, right, what are you going to do? You're actually going to spend it, you're going to spank it, and that means that someone else has got money in their pockets and they're going to spend that, and then that money makes money, and you put money into the economy. It's like trickle-down economics doesn't work. Don't give tax breaks to the rich. You want trickle-up economics. So if you want to stimulate the economy, you should always basically give money to the poorest in society. Why do you do that? Because the poor spend their money, they don't save it. They're not very good at saving. And that's actually really good for stimulating the economy. So rather than give tax breaks to the rich and say, oh, they're the ones that generate jobs and they're the ones that generate, it's a load of bollocks. It doesn't work. Trickle down economics is is a myth, right? Or if it works in it's the least best way to stimulate the economy. You're just making rich people richer in the hope that it trickles down. It used to be called horse and sparrow economics because you'd give the horse oats. The horse would crap out oats, and the sparrows would peck at the crap that's crapped out, right? And it's like, yeah, great. So that the poor people get to peck at the poo at the bottom. That trickle down. It just doesn't work. So you want trickle up. So you pay poor people, and that will stimulate the economy way better than giving rich people money. Anyway, that's my rant over. But when you are stimulating the economy by giving, here, yes, okay, big corporations, military industrial corporations, you're paying them and they're making loads, and the CEO is going to make lots. But I'm talking here about jobs here. The jobs, when you're giving these people jobs, making ammunition, then these guys are going to go and spend that money out in the local economy, and it will stimulate your local economy. So this is good for Pennsylvania. It's good for the US. It's kind of what I'm saying. But I did go off on one. Sorry, wasting time. Right, Ramstein 10 results. So this is yesterday. This virtual Ramstein. Sweden to send 10 Leopards. Awesome. We're going to talk about that as more Leopards. Air defense components as well. Norway and the US to donate 2 more NASAMS. So Norwegian or national air defense system. Really good. So you've got Patriot, NASAMS, SAMP-T, Iris. These are the best ones in the world. Netherlands, new contracts to ensure new weapons deliveries. Slovenia to help meet several of Ukraine's priority requirements, including armor. Okay, a little bit more detail. Spain has announced that it will send an additional 4 Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine, bringing their total number to 10. So that's brilliant. They're upping their Leopards. Canadian government has announced that they will be transferring an additional 8,000 artillery shells. Okay, that'll go in like a day. So, but that's great. Ukraine need that, of course, and at least 12 air defense systems to Ukraine in the coming weeks. That is not. I think that's 12 air defense. That is munition for air defense. They're not sending 12 air defense systems. I'm pretty sure. And this aid package is expected to arrive alongside the 8 Leopard 2A4 main battle tanks already pledged. I don't know if they mention that anywhere. Correction, yeah, Canada is sending shells and 12 air defense missiles, not entire systems. So that would be amazing. But so they're just helping, just keep on giving stuff. Sweden will provide Ukraine with 10 Leopard 2 tanks. This was announced during the Ramstein meeting. So I believe that's more Leopard 2 tanks from Sweden. The 4 to 8 Leopard 2A4 tanks that Canada pledged to Ukraine already arrived in Poland early last month and have been waiting for Ukrainian tank crews to become familiar with the system before being handed over. So they're getting their training probably in Germany, but those tanks are already in Poland, ready to be picked up. Germany's defense. Now, I like it when stuff I say dovetails with like facts on the ground. I talked yesterday about things like Rheinmetall and the German defense industry needing to up their game. Germany needs to spend more money on their defense if they want their defense industry to compete worldwide, and if they want to be able to produce the stuff that Ukraine needs. So Germany's defense industry says it's ready to ramp up its output. I found this in the Guardian sort of live blog. Including the production of the kinds of arms and ammunition needed by Ukraine, but that it needs clarity about what governments want before investing in further production capacity. And this is the work that needs to go between the German government and the defense industry. So Rheinmetall need guidance from the government. The government need to be really strong, and the SPD, the German government in command, their administration is not known for doing this kind of I think defense, anti-Russia defense kind of stuff. So I think there's a bit of tension going on there. Just to add, China, Iran, and Russia will conduct maritime drills in the Gulf of Oman starting today, said the China defense ministry. Anyway, talking about Rheinmetall, so the CEO Armin Papiga said that the company is currently repairing 50 Leopard 2s and 100 Leopard 1 tanks. So these guys, it is a great time to be an out-of-work mechanic around the Rheinmetall. Factories, you'd be like, yeah, job please, thank you very much. Leopard 1 tanks, and plans to purchase 36 Leopard 2 in Switzerland to further transfer to Ukraine. fantastic. I mean, Rheinmetall are really, it's in their best interest. They're going to make money out of this, but they are really wanting to aid Ukraine as much as possible. Denmark sends a new aid package worth $141 million. It consists of 556 mil and 12.7 mil small and heavy ammunition, charges for 155 mil shells, anti-tank mines and missiles for air defense, as well as military generators, mobile workshops, and thousands of sets of waterproof uniforms. So Denmark coming up with the goods there as well. And possibly Israel. I've talked about this a couple of times recently. Israel recently approved the export licenses for the possible sale of anti-drone jamming systems that could help Ukraine counter Iranian drones used by Russia during the war. 3 Israeli and Ukrainian officials said, as reported in Axios. So there could be an opening up between Israel and Ukraine, such that we're starting to see. I mean, this looks like defensive weaponry, but there's been talk about offensive weaponry maybe being able to be delivered in the future. Since the start, so going on to geopolitical stuff, since the start of the war in Ukraine, so Spain, brilliant, given them some more Leopard 2 tanks. However, Spain has imported 84% more Russian LNG. So this is liquefied natural gas, which Russia is not as good at producing. So America is very good at producing LNG, and that's why they've kind of taken over. But Russia apparently is producing some, becoming the top buyer of Russian LNG so far in 2023. Spain is also a top spender on all things Russian energy, with $1 billion spent on combined oil and gas. I wonder if there are any Spanish people in the threads wanting to comment on this. Is this something you know about? It appears that Spain are, and it's difficult, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, you want your country to have energy, and you want to spend as little as possible, and you don't want things to be expensive and to like aid inflation, to add inflationary pressures to your economy. But on the other hand, morality and geopolitics. So that's a difficult. It's not like slamming Spain. I do under. It's like Germany. Everyone was really quick to slam Germany over what they've done over the last decade in becoming reliant on Russian hydrocarbons. But at the end of the day, they wanted to get cheap energy, and that's understandable. And they wanted to try and get. Merkel's approach was to try and get Putin on board to adapt Russia by trying inviting them into the group and changing them from being friends rather than throw them out and expecting them to change whilst being ostracized as a nation. You can understand that it just didn't work. And maybe they could have done it better, but I'm not slagging off Spain here. It's easy, UK were like, oh, we don't use Russian energy. Yeah, but that's probably for a whole bunch of different reasons. And we've got the North Sea and all sorts of stuff. Had UK been Spain, would we have been any different? I don't know. So all I'd say is it would be rather nice if Spain changed their approach there and didn't support the Russian war effort. Poland has busted a spy network working for Russia, Radio RMF24 reported. 6 foreigners were detained after dozens of hidden cameras were discovered on highways and railway junctions, mainly in the area of Rizhao, and the main hub for defense aid to Ukraine. And this is something that I've talked about before, but not in detail. Like I've said, I'm under the impression that Russia have a bunch of spies operating in Poland, looking at the networks of transportation for Ukrainian, or for equipment going to Ukraine, and you bet your bottom dollar they're there trying to get information so that they can be hit in some way. Well, Poland has rooted out some of these, and that's really good news. Excellent stuff. So finally, Syria recognized. So check who your mates are. North Korea, awesome. Ow. North Korea, awesome. Iran, awesome. Syria, al-Bashad, awesome. Hey, you've got good friends, Russia, good friends. You hang out with cool people. Syria recognizes the self-proclaimed new borders of Russia. Of course it does, which include Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia regions, not even in control of Russia, based on historical facts, says Syrian President al-Assad. Where do you finish that history? Is that historical facts from what, 2014 onwards? Historical facts from just the part where Ukraine was a Soviet republic? You giving up history? You want to go further back, or do you not want to look at like modern history? New countries start at some point. At some point, a country didn't exist, or at some point a country is new, it doesn't mean that because it's new, it doesn't have a right to exist and right to self determination. Like your country was new once. You don't go, oh, look at how it was before that. Maybe we should keep it how it was before because, historical facts. So shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. Just cherry picking. But of course, he knows which side his bread is buttered, and it's the Russian side. And so uh, there you go. And of course, like I've said before, the entire reason Russia are supporting Syria is because they get a port in the Mediterranean. That's it. That's the whole reason. I was speaking to my naval friend about that, and he was saying, "Yeah, people don't generally understand that the entire reason Russia is supporting Syria is so that they have a naval port in the Mediterranean, and that's it. Otherwise, why would they care about Syria? Of course, it's all to do with their strategies. Another thing that's worth noting, I was speaking to someone recently. There's a bunch of Abramovich, Roman Abramovich, is super rich Russian oligarch. He was trying to help with the peace deals. He got possibly poisoned himself. But anyway, he's a super rich oligarch. He owned Chelsea Football Club, then had to give that up because of sanctions. Anyway, I think there's around 4.1 billion pounds possibly of Abramovich's money that's going to soon be finding its way into Ukraine. I don't know if it's rebuilding humanitarian stuff. It won't be sort of military things, but super important. Uh, Fantastic. I don't know whether I should be sharing that information, but anyway, there is uh, there is potential for a whole bunch of money to come out, and in fact, there's a load more money as well that potentially could be used. But I'll try and get some more information on that. Anyway, thank you. That's the today's news. Please like, subscribe, and share. Sorry, it's been a long one. It's just so much news. There was Ramstein yesterday. Really appreciate all your support. Toodle pips. Speak later.